How do I compare municipal bonds to taxable bonds? Because municipal bonds have a tax-free element to them.
Yeah. Okay. So, obviously there's all kinds of different municipalities that issue debt. And one of the things that they try to do to make you buy that debt is to offer it as a tax-free growth, but they often pay less.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a factor there you have to consider. And so, first of all, let's share how you calculate it. So you can do what's called the taxable equivalent yield, right? So you take your yield for a municipal bond, whatever that is,
Yep.
and you figure out your tax rate, and you do 1 minus the tax rate and divide into the yield, and it'll tell you what that is. And so there's another table here provided by Hartford funds. Kind of cool. Shows for different across the top there, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4, 5.5 on muni bond
Yep.
yields. And where are they at right now? Would you say
About like four, like 3.5 to 4, depending on
three
like
and
the
a half,
credit
4?
worthiness, and so you'll get the equivalents kind of toward. It depends on your tax rate, but
Yeah.
it's very comparable to a treasury bond.
Yeah. If we look at 3.5, and you're in the 10% bracket, if you can get 3.89%, right? And three, it depends on single or married, and 3.98 to for the 12%, et cetera. But you you end up, that's the same return, right? Even though
Yeah.
you pay taxes. But if you go down the list all the way to the maximum rate, which is 40.8%, that's the 37% plus the 3.7%
Yep. Net income.
ACA, what do they call it, net income tax?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's to sponsor the ACA, the Obamacare, whatever you want to call that, and that that is equivalent of 5.91%. So if you go out there right now and you wanted to buy, let's say, a 2-year treasury, you're not going to get 5.91%
Hmm.
today. So you might be better off with that municipal bond, at least on a taxable basis, at 3.5 if you're in that higher bracket. So it makes a difference what bracket you're in as to whether or not it pays off.
And then sometimes with municipal bonds, for California as example, if you buy a California municipal bond, you don't pay California income tax on that. So
Yeah.
if you're trying to get an equivalent rate on that, you have to add your federal tax bracket and your state tax bracket together to get, and then do the calculation.
Yeah.
So that can kind of change, but it varies on state to state. Depending, most states, if you're buying within them, if you're a resident buying within your state, usually it's tax free for your state income tax.
Yeah, double tax free basically is
Yeah.
what you're looking at there. And yeah, and so, but there are some other considerations, and one of the things that I think is really important to understand is taxes are only part of the issue here. The equivalent rates get pretty close. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I think right now munis are probably a little bit of a premium over what you can get on the taxable side. However, there are things to consider outside of that, so you have to be careful here. First of all, what's your tax bracket? Does it make sense? Let's say it does. Let's say you're in a higher tax bracket. Now you're looking at what you're doing with your overall portfolio. Because, for example, in 2008, and again, I'm looking at this for somebody that's retired, right? This is important to understand. Because 2008, there were several municipalities that defaulted on their debt,
Yeah.
right? And so if I had a choice between buying a treasury that had a slightly less yield after tax versus a municipal bond, I might buy that treasury, or at least I would mix those two together,
Hmm.
because when 2008 happened, municipal bonds fell much more than treasuries did.
People don't run to municipal
Right.
bonds like they do to T-bills.
That's right. And during the 2020 downturn, what went up? Not municipal bonds. They actually went down. There was some fear for what might happen there, and treasuries went up, right? And so that's what happens. That you don't have the same parachute effect with a municipal bond, and so be careful, because the money that you're going to make in your life is going to come from stocks and real estate, and the bonds is kind of a placeholder, a thing to use to not have everything in stocks and real estate, a diversifier, and it can have an exaggerated effect of being able to go up when the stock market goes down, right? Doesn't always work. Didn't work last year. Bond
Yep.
market went down, so in inflationary environments, that doesn't work, right? And so, matter of fact, real estate, I don't know that it went down much, but it struggles even then too. All
Yep.
three of those classes when you get this high inflation because they're raising rates so aggressively. But it's a good question, and it's good to understand how this works. I would not, even if I was in a higher tax bracket, be pumping most of my bond money into municipal bonds. First of all, you have other accounts like Roth IRAs and regular IRAs and 401ks where you can't use municipals anyway. But on my taxable accounts, I'd still be looking very carefully at my overall allocation to munis versus regular bonds, especially government bonds, because I look at the bond portion of portfolio not so much for a return, but just more as a protection asset for the stock market side. That's just my outlook on it, and it's been that way for a long time. But it's a good question.